And what does our reading for this time cover? Second Chronicles 1 through 8. Now, that's good. I'm glad we're doing this, and everyone should give Marty a pat on the back for getting this started. Chronicles. Now, I do have a couple of questions for you that don't have anything to do with our reading, except what other book is First Chronicles like? Tells the same kind of stuff in First Chronicles as First and Second what? First and Second Samuel. First Chronicles is a parallel with First and Second Samuel. Second Chronicles parallels First and Second Kings. You may have misunderstood my question. Okay. And once I understood that, and I remember, that was like a big light bulb went off, and I said, wow, the Bible makes a lot more sense, when you know that.
In certain orders of the Bible, we don't have the order that the Bible was originally put in. The books have been in several orders. In some versions of the way the Bible's been ordered, Chronicles goes at the very end, and so it's like a retelling.
Yeah, it is. Kind of like Deuteronomy retells the events of them leaving Egypt and all that stuff. Okay. I think in the Jewish Bible, First and Second Samuel is one book. It's the book of Samuel. Kings are one book. It's just the book of Kings. Okay. What is Second Chronicles? What's the big picture that's going on at the beginning of Second Chronicles? Solomon's prayer, wisdom. Solomon is becoming king and getting established as king. In First Kings, it goes through a list of people that he needed to deal with when he began to be king. Second Chronicles does not include that. And what's going to be happening? What great event is happening at this time? They're building the temple. They finally are going to build the temple. And do we know about how long it took to build the temple? Well, I thought I got 20 years. Somebody looked that up. I thought it was 20 years. In fact, I thought that was so obvious I didn't even write it down. So somebody needs to find that and get me straightened out. Now, okay. Before they had the temple, they had a tabernacle, which is a fancy tent, this fancy tent. And where did that fancy tent, this tabernacle, come from? Did they go down to, Tents R Us and get one? The tabernacle. They built it, and when approximately was it built? Not a year, but what was going on? Moses. Back in the days of Moses, and I probably should have looked this up, but there's been a great amount of time since the day of Moses and the time that tabernacle was put together or built until now, when they're going to build a real building in Jerusalem to worship God. 7 years. Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Learn something every day. Okay. Okay. Where was Where was that tabernacle at the beginning of 2nd Chronicles? Gibeon? Not Gibbon. Gibbon's a type of ape, right? It's Gibeon. Gibeon is a location. That's where the tabernacle was. Was the Ark of the Covenant also there? And I don't know how this happened. It just really dawned on me when I was going through this that when the tabernacle was originally built, there was a place within the tabernacle, the most holy place, or the holiest of holies, where the ark resided. But somehow it was no longer there. David had moved it to Jerusalem and had built a place for it there. Anyway, where was the ark at this time? Where? No, the ark was where? At the beginning of 2nd Chronicles. It wasn't in Jerusalem? David moved it to Jerusalem. He had built some kind of place for it there in Jerusalem. Which, I mean, we got the tabernacle set with the most holiest of holy place separate from the ark that's located some number of miles away, which that just ain't right. That ain't right. And it went on for many years. In chapter 2, of course, y'all mentioned that Solomon did ask for wisdom that he might rule the people because they're such a great people, and they're the true people of God, and he wanted to be able to do it right. In chapter 3, where was the new temple built? Okay. That is beautiful. Now, it's actually on a specific hill within the city of Jerusalem that's called what? Mount Moriah. Okay, Mount Moriah, 2nd Chronicles, I believe it's 3 and verse 1. It doesn't mention it there, does it? Yeah, and he began to build the temple in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah. Okay, good. Right. That's right. Okay, now, I kind of like to follow some of the family names through the Bible, and sometimes you have to go way back to Genesis. It helps us to understand the bad blood that exists between certain groups of people. There's bad blood between the descendants of Esau and the descendants of, what's his brother's name? Jacob. There's always been bad blood. I mean, there's always a bunch of Esau descendants that don't like the descendants of Jacob. So understanding that helps understand some of the battles they face. And it is interesting to me that, when David married Bathsheba and had her husband killed, what was his name and what's he called? Uriah the Hittite. Where did the Hittites come from? They're not Israelites. They descended from another son of Noah. They descended from another son of Noah. The Jewish people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, descended from Shem. They were descendants of Shem. And then we've got this, when David bought I'm just about finished, so get ready. Noah's going to teach, so get ready. When it's going to be great. When David bought that piece of land from Araunah, he's called Araunah the Jebusite. He was a Jebusite. And again, that's not Jewish. That's not a descendant of Shem, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's a descendant of somebody else. Now, it turns out that Ham had a son named Canaan, and Canaan became, his descendants became known as Jebusites. That's what I found out. So understanding that, here's a foreigner, the Jebusites lived on that in Jerusalem and maintained that, and he was still there, left over from way back when they conquered the land. And anyway, he was a Jebusite and sold the land to David, which they built the temple. I got a lot more questions, but I'm out of time. Thank you for your attention. Please keep up with the reading. The schedule is to read 4 chapters a day, and if you get behind, you got the whole weekend to get caught up. And you can start, at any place. Today's the 1st of June. Good time to start. If you're behind, if you started, if you left it, restart yourself. I've done that. Anyway, Noah.
All right, if you would, be turning in your Bibles to Luke 15. We'll be in verses 11 through 32. All right, I kind of yell, so if I'm too loud, I apologize. But before we get started, Brother Michael, would you lead us in a word of prayer?
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day you blessed us with, giving us the ability to come out and worship you this morning. Lord, we pray that you be with Noah as he goes to Tyler State. We pray that we'll open up our minds. We will find something in this class that you may apply in our lives. Lord, we thank you for our health. Thank you for your son.
Amen. All right. So, when Brother Marty asked me to take over for him, and we're doing the lesson of the prodigal son, he was like, do this when it's very easy. And while, it's one of those that you've probably heard 100 times that, it's something that to try to get accomplished in 35 to 40 minutes is not something that's going to be very easy. So I'm going to try to fly through it and take some time. And so the book lays it out very, very good. It breaks it down into sections, and that's kind of how I want to approach it as well. But perfect. All right, very easy. All right, so the first thing that's important when we look at any parable is to go and try to find the context of who he's talking to, right? And it's a continuation of what happens that we studied on Wednesday night, right? When we talked about the lost sheep, we talked about the lost coin, right? And he's still talking to the same people, right? He's still talking to the tax collectors. He's still talking to the Pharisees and all of those that are with hardened hearts, right? And so that's what he is trying to get accomplished in this main thing, right? Keep pressing on button. I apologize. So here's the parable. I know it's very tiny, and I apologize. Will somebody mind reading verses 11 through 32? I believe it is 33. We'll try to read it, and then we'll break it down into section by section. Anybody mind reading the whole thing? Thank you, Alan.
It said there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share offered to his younger son. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and returned to a foreign country, and there he squandered his property in reckless wickedness. When he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out as one of the citizens of that country, and he sent
Very good. So we're going to try and take all of that, and then we're going to pack it into different sections, right? And so I know that, thank you for reading that. I know it's a long passage, long part of the Bible. But we're going to try and break it down. So it's very important that as we go through this, we realize that we have three main characters, right? We have three main people that in this story that all have different aspects of their lives, their reactions, how they approach life, and things like that, right? And so the first one we have is the father. Who does the father in the story represent in the parable of the prodigal son? God, right? God the Fatherhead, right? That's the one that we're supposed to follow. He's the one that has the children, that sends them out, you know, that we're supposed to follow. Very good. Okay, so who does the prodigal son represent? This one kind of gets a little more tricky. And the last one I think is even trickier.
There, I think specifically are the people Jesus is speaking with, in that he's having compassion on them and trying to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Both of the sons are the people that he's speaking to. All of the people, you know, he's talking to not only the Pharisees, but he's also talking to the tax collectors, right? The sinners that are in the crowd, right? And I think he's kind of making that differentiation between the two. I know it's a big word, I'm sorry, right? I think he's trying to make that comparison between the two of those that are the tax collectors and those that are the Pharisees that are stuck in their own ways, right? You have the prodigal son who leaves, he goes, he lives in sin, right? But then he comes back, right, to accept his inheritance, right? And then you have the eldest child who at the end of the story has a much different reaction. Well, I've always been here, right? I've always been doing what you've told. I've always been doing the things that you want, right? And so he's trying to make this comparison, and so he goes in with the rest of the story that kind of develops these types of people. And so the first one I want to look at is sort of the prodigal son's journey. And I want to take it, will be in verses 12 through 20, or excuse me, 12 through 19. And I want to kind of, how we do our inductive study, if there's any verses that stick out to you while we're in this portion of the Word, right, I would like to go and try to make connections here. And so I'll kind of reread those really quickly. In verse 12, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent them to the fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But where he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. Right? And so, somebody go into how he is feeling when he leaves, right? What is his thought process when he leaves and says, hey, give me all that I'm owed so that I may leave, right? What is that sort of representing or sort of symbolizing, maybe in a modern time or in a way that we can apply to our lives? Rebellious, right? It's that time, before we are saved, right? The time that before we are accepted, right? That broken spirit when you're living in sin, right? And you can sort of see the direct relation of how sin relates to your life, right? He goes and he gets so hungry that he would eat what the pigs eat, right? How depraved do you have to be to get to that state, right? I promise you, there's never been a point in my life where I've wanted to say, like, I want to eat pig slop, right? Like, there's nothing about that interests me, right? So how depraved does that make you, right? And that's exactly what sin does to you, right? It makes you so depraved and so far away from God, right, that you're willing to attach onto anything to sort of find some solace, right? It's exactly the message of what he's trying to portray here, is that he is so far away from God that he will do anything, right, to sort of get back to it, right? He will go eat pig slop, okay? right? And so how he returns, okay? He says the first thing that he does when he tries to return to his father is he has to repent, right? He has to go and he has to say that I'm doing wrong, right? The first thing that he says when he wants to get back, first off, he's so deep in sin and he's so hungry that he's like, even my father's servants have enough bread to eat and to spare, right? So why am I living in this situation? Why am I continuing on and staying in this same spot when if I go home, even if my dad makes me a servant, right? Maybe he don't accept me, but even if he makes me a servant, I'll have enough bread to at least eat, right? To at least live. And so he says, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. There's another spot in the. Oh, go ahead, Alan. I'm sorry.
So I had never really considered this in the context of prior parable. It's almost an answer to the Pharisees who are thinking while Jesus is talking. Yeah, okay, we lost the coin, we lost the sheep. Oh, that wasn't their fault. But these sinners are evil. They're choices they will make.
Absolutely.
And so it's an answer to that.
Absolutely. And I think, when he gets to the recap, when he the whole point that he's trying to make during this whole parable is that, it's where your heart is, right? And so, you talk about that and then you have the eldest son's reaction later in the story, right? Well, he goes and, that's what he's talking about. He's directly speaking to these people that are like, they're sinners. Why are you with them? Right? That's what he's trying to get the point across. And he's like, well, I use them, right? They're a part of my family as well if they repent and they accept and they are saved. Right?
We don't know that they have to.
You're right. We don't know.
He's
Yeah.
really not sugarcoating anything for the collectors and the sinners
No.
he's with. He's telling them, like, you're in the same position as the guy eating pig slop.
Absolutely.
He's not really being super gentle.
No, absolutely not, right? And he, that's his story. Like, you're going to live in slop. Like, you're going to eat what the pigs eat. Okay? Thank you. And so the prodigal son leaves. He comes back, and now he kind of wants to confront his father, right? And so what do you think is the mindset that he has? He took his father's inheritance, right? He took what was rightfully his, or what he thought was rightfully his, and he has to go back to his father, crawling and scratching and begging, hoping that he can come back to his family. Right? Do you think that was easy for him? Do you think it was easy for the sinner, for the prodigal son to return to his father and ask for that? No, right?
Yes and no, but he's going to face consequences.
Yeah, he's going to have to face some consequences,
And,
right?
I think a lot of times people of the world, people that have been part of the church, have fallen away. Sometimes they can feel the same way. Maybe I'm not worthy to come back. Maybe I'm not worthy because of what I've done. It's what people say or think.
Yeah.
That's the whole part of the
Absolutely.
story as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of the next part, right? Yes, Chris?
Not only shame because he walked out the door, thought he knew what he was doing, and all of it, now he's begging to come back.
Absolutely. And so it kind of reinforces a couple of main points that we have is that, one, you can't do this life by yourself, right? Like, you are not given the tools or the keys to do this life by yourself. If you live in sin, this is going to be the result that happens for you, right? It's part of it. Okay? If you choose to not be a part of your family, if you choose to not be a part of God's love, right, you're going to be separated from it. You're not going to be able to benefit from those things. So you're exactly right. And so there's another story in the Bible that somebody's kind of scared to go back to their family and face the consequences of what they've done, right? What story is that, Mr. Chuck?
I'm thinking about Esau. I mean, Jacob.
Absolutely.
Jacob had to go back. He was done with Laban, and he went back to meet his family, and he thought, his brother might just be out with even the score right here.
Yeah, absolutely, right? So if we go to Genesis, I believe it is chapter 32. we have Esau comes back to meet Jacob, right? And so it says, Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. When Jacob sent messengers before Esau, his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, he commanded them, saying, "Speak thus to my lord Esau. Thus your servant Jacob says, I have dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight." And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him, and the flocks and the herds and camels into 2 companies. And he said, "If Esau comes to one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape," right? So Jacob goes, and he has to go back and meet Esau, right? And if you know the story of what happens before, he's already stolen his birthright. He's already stolen the things that are the most important that were handed down to Esau. So he has every right to believe that when he goes back to meet his brother, that it's not going to be an easy thing, right? That Esau's probably going to come back with some sort of repercussions, right? And so the next part of the story is the father's reaction, right? So how does the father go and receive his son for which he asked for forgiveness, right? And so in verse 20 through 24, it says, "And he arose, came to his father, but when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to be merry." Right? So, the prodigal son goes and he says, "Father, I have sinned. I have lost everything. I'm broken." Right? And then the father's reaction, right, could have very easily have been, "Stay away from me. You're no longer my son." Right? He could have very easily have done that, but he doesn't. Right? He shows compassion. Right? And he brings him back. And so, does anything stick out as far as his reaction, as far as what he brings to the son to be married, right? Verses 22, 23, and 24. Do any of those things kind of stick out in your mind about how he did it?
What sticks out to me when he saw it from a long way off, he
Yeah.
ran to it.
Exactly.
Which means there was no second guessing about what he was going to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
He's always looking for it.
Yeah, yeah.
he was always wanting to return, right? Like, especially, not a parent yet, right? But you want the best for your children, right? You want the best for them. No matter the situation, no matter if they make mistakes, no matter if, they go through something in life, you want your children to be a part of your family. And you know that as a parent that you're the one that can protect them as well, right? You know that you're the one that can, you say it all the time, right? A lot of we got all the teenager years. They think they know everything, right? They think they know what's best for them, and so they're going to go do it their way. And it don't matter if you tell them 500 times, right, that they're still going to go do it their way, right? And sometimes people just have to make that own mistake themselves, right? People have to go through it themselves to learn, right? But the Father, He knows that what has happened. He knows that he is living in sin. He knows that he's lost everything, and so when he sees him, he runs, right? He goes. He seeks out after him. Right? He don't just stand and wait. He don't just, "Oh, I hope he comes back." No, he goes and he finds him, right? He sees him from afar away, and he goes out to go get him, right? One of the things that kind of stuck out to me, just to kind of symbolize, restoration, is the father said to his servants, "Bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet," right? And what does that signify? Yeah, that you are a part of the high family, right? You're not a servant, right? Servants weren't given sandals to be put on their feet, right? They weren't given just bread to eat. Yes, sir, Chris?
Instead of him, when he was coming back, going back to being a hired servant,
Yeah,
the father said, "No, I'm gonna put you back in the world of more."
exactly, right? And so, the sandals, the ring, the robe, that you're a part now of the Father's family, right? You're back at the high table. you're not going to be a servant. You're not going to eat just bread, enough to spare, right? He goes and he kills the fattened calf, right? The best one, the one that that everybody wants to eat. Okay, that's what he does with it. He don't just go ahead, Mike. What I'm saying is he don't just make him a servant, right? He brings him with him, right? He makes him a part again. He restores him to that family status. Right? It's complete forgiveness, right? It wasn't partial. It wasn't, I'm going to hold this over your head. I'm not going to do that. It didn't say anything about that, right? It was complete forgiveness, right? He was restored. He was brought all the way back, right? And so to kind of go along with Mr. Jeff's point, what should our reaction be to those that fall away and try to come back, right? Think about families that have left and, that have fallen away, that have, Brother Scott preached a message on it just a week ago, right? How should we treat those people, right? How should we emulate the Father in this situation, right? Or, we get somebody that comes in, they're in, dusty jeans, work clothes, right? How do we treat them, right? What should our reaction be? Well, yes, sir, Mr. Jim. Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially, we're in no position, right? It doesn't, our faults do not matter. If they're here, if somebody walks into this building to try to reach closer to God, it is our part to make them a family, right? It's our part to make them join, right? That's our job, right? That's what we're commanded to do, okay? To go out, preach, right? And bring others to God. That's part of that's what our life goal should be, right? And so it doesn't matter what they walk in here like, right? It's our job to love, to comfort, to share that they're a part of our church family if they would choose to do so, right? And I'll tell you, I had I'm sorry, but I'll never forget. I think Kayla and I had just started dating, and it was a Wednesday night. And I'll tell you where I was in a bad example of this. There was a gentleman that came up to the front row, and he was being a little egregious towards Chris. And I'm sure many of you remember it was a real weird night, right? And it was like my third time here. I'm not gonna lie, I was real scared. Okay, and so my first reaction was I was sitting about where Kayla was. My first reaction was to move down where Jeff was because I didn't know what was about to happen, right? And that was bad thoughts of me, right? Because he started making those statements. He started, obviously the man needed help, right? The man, something was not right. And my first reaction was not, to be the guy that goes and introduces myself, to go up and says, hey, something's wrong here. I need to go talk to this man. My first reaction was, I need to make sure everybody else is safe. And I know I'm on the front row, so if something happens here, I might have to go tackle him, right? And that was honestly what was going through my head, right? And that was awful of me, right? But it was the first thing that popped in my mind was not to go and be that person, right? To go and say, hey, man, this guy needs to have a conversation. This guy needs to be told, what the gospel is. This man needs to go and see, this is not what we're supposed to be like, right? And so just being honest with myself, that was my first initial reaction, right? And so that, enough about me. But the Father's reaction was welcome, to bring home, to comfort, right? To be married, to celebrate with, right? And so why do you think that this portion right here is so important in the context of who he's talking to? How we should welcome everyone, right? And so like the Pharisees had just accused him of being with tax collectors. They had just accused him of healing on the Sabbath. They had just accused him of dwelling with sinners, right? And and the whole point that he is trying to make is that we're supposed to be that's what this is about, right? It's not about who follows the law the best, right? It's not about, I held all these commandments right dear, and they still live in sin and they still have hard hearts, right? That's not what this is about. This is about repentance. This is about following Christ, and that Christ makes things right, okay? And so the last one is the eldest son's reaction. I'm sorry it's so small on the screen. It didn't look like that on my computer. So, in the last verses, so in, let me get back to where starting in verse 25, it says, "Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as the son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad. Your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found." Right? And so the older brother reaction, right? How does he react? What is his thought? Right? We said this is the people that are the Pharisees. These are the self-righteous. These are the people that have the hardest hearts. Right? So, what is the point, the father's reaction to the oldest son? What are they trying to get across here? Absolutely. Brother Bill? Absolutely.
One thing that stands out to me is that he said, You never gave me a goat to make merry with my friends. Father goes, almost like he goes, What?
Yeah.
All I have is yours.
Yeah.
Like, could have done that at any time. And so I think the idea is that you haven't taken full advantage of being my son if you wanted to do. And it's kind of like, but that's why he's sulky. He hasn't really lived in the joy of his being his father's son like he ought not, like he ought to live. And that, I believe, is why he's envious. Is because he's not living in the joy of being his father's son.
Absolutely.
That's why people get envious like that.
I agree, right? That the celebration that the broken man, the prodigal son, receives is so great that it made the other man jealous, right? It's like, I've been doing what I'm supposed to this whole time. And you're telling me that if I would have ran away and came back, I would have gotten a big party, right? Like, it was almost looking for something that wasn't there, that he could have had the entire time. You're exactly right. All right, I'm going to try to get through a few questions. I'm sorry. like a common theme that we can't get through them, but we're going to try, right? How does the short story of the prodigal son capture the essence of the gospel?
Show that no matter who you are, what you've done, God is waiting to open arms for you to come back. You're not going to hold anything against you. He's going to love you through sin as long as you repent.
Absolutely, right? It shows that the gospel, that it's for everybody, right? That through true repentance and turning away from that sin and being a part of the church family and being a part of God's family, right? That's for everybody. There's not a person that it's closed off to, okay? Question 2, we kind of talked about it. What are the similarities of the story and the story of Jacob's return to Esau? Okay, we can go back to that in Genesis chapter 32. How did Esau, go and accept Jacob when he returns to him? Joyfully.
Happy to see his brother come back.
Yeah, absolutely. He ran up to him, he hugged him, and he kissed him, right? The same exact things that happened in the prodigal son story, right? He received it with love because he was his family. He was his brother, right? It didn't matter what he had done. Jacob tried to repent. Jacob tried to, give him all of these things, the goats, the servants, the things like that. He tried to go and return those all to him, and Esau didn't care about any of that. Right? All he cared was that his brother was back. Okay. Question number 3: what are the common links between this story, the story of the lost sheep, and the story of the lost coin? Right. It's kind of a summarization of what Thaddeus talked about on Wednesday night. So, what are the similarities? Exactly. It's cause for rejoice. It's not cause for disdain. It's not cause for, something that we should hold our heads up. Mr. Chuck.
I've always looked, kind of at the bigger picture. There's the lost sheep, and then there's the lost coin, and now the most valuable of all, the lost son.
Absolutely. And I think that's sort of the differences, right? Is that you have these material possessions, right? You have these material possessions that, he's talked about in parables and he's talked about in those things. And then he goes and he says, well, now let's look at it in human terms, right? This is one of those times where he says, like, I told you those parables. He's really trying to reiterate the point of what happens in this story. He's really trying to hammer this into them, that you're not the judges, that I'm the judge, that I'm the father, right? And so he does that by, a third time. Maybe they'll get it through their schools of why I'm dwelling with sinners, because the gospel's for everybody. All right, I think that's where we're going to have to end. Thank you guys for all your time and attention.